I'm engaged to my wife's sister. I know how that sounds. I can already hear the keyboards clicking, the judgments forming. You're probably picturing me as some kind of monster, a homewrecker. But the truth is, the home I supposedly wrecked was redesigned by its own architect, my wife. I'm just living in it, following the blueprints she handed me. In the process, I found a love I never expected, a love that is honest, real, and as of 1 week ago, solidified by a ring and a promise. My name is Lucas Turner. I'm 34, and my life is complicated. Until recently, it was also stable. I am legally married to Sarah Turner, 33. We've been married for 5 years. I am also formally engaged to her younger sister, Abigail, who is 31. We've been together for the last 10 months. This isn't some sordid secret. It's an arrangement with a very specific set of rules laid out in what we call the open marriage agreement. And the most important rule, the one that governs this entire situation, is that I'm not the one who wrote it. Sarah did. A year ago, my life was completely different. Sarah and I had been married for 4 years, and it was fine. We met 7 years ago, dated for 2, and did the whole walk down the aisle thing. And yes, her maiden name was also Turner. It was just one of those strange cosmic coincidences that saved us some money on monogram towels. For 4 years, our marriage was exactly what you'd expect: monogamous, predictable, comfortable. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our shared circle of friends. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was our life. I was content. I thought she was too. Then one evening, she sat me down on the couch where we'd watched countless movies and planned vacations, and she dropped a bomb that rearranged our universe. She wanted to open our marriage. My first reaction was a gut punch of confusion. Had I done something wrong? Was I not enough? My mind raced through 1,000 painful possibilities, but Sarah was calm, almost clinical. She explained that it wasn't about me, not really. It was about her. She had developed feelings for someone else, her boss. She laid it all out. She wanted the freedom to explore this connection without the guilt of infidelity. She didn't want a divorce. She insisted on that. She said she still valued our partnership, our home, the life we had built. But she needed more. She proposed a set of terms: we would remain married, living together, sharing finances, but we would both be free to see other people. No secrets, she said. Full transparency. It was, in her words, an evolution of our relationship. I was devastated. It felt like the foundation of our marriage had turned to sand. But what choice did I have? If I said no, she would either resent me forever or leave me anyway. So I said yes. I swallowed my pride and agreed to her terms, to her open marriage. I signed on the dotted line of our new verbal contract, hoping it was just a phase, that she would get it out of her system and things would return to normal. I had no intention of using the open part of our agreement for myself. My focus was on survival. For the first 2 months, I was miserable. Sarah would go on dates with her boss, and I would sit at home pretending it didn't feel like 1,000 tiny needles in my chest. Our conversations became logistical. We weren't a husband and wife anymore. We were co-managers of our house. We talked about bills and groceries. The passion, the intimacy, the very soul of our relationship had been surgically removed, leaving only a sterile, functional partnership. It was during this time that Abigail, Sarah's sister, became my lifeline. She had always been a part of our lives, but with Sarah emotionally checked out, Abigail stepped into the void. She would call to see how I was doing or invite me out for coffee just to get me out of the house. She never took sides or badmouthed her sister. She just listened. She listened to my confusion, my hurt, my loneliness, and she never judged. As we spent more time together, something shifted. Our conversations went from being about my failing marriage to being about us. We talked about our dreams, our fears, our childhood stories. I learned she had a wicked sense of humor and a laugh that could light up a room. I learned she was fiercely intelligent and compassionate. For the first time in months, I felt seen, not as Sarah's husband, but as Lucas. About 10 months ago, after a long evening of talking that bled into the early hours, something undeniable sparked between us. It was terrifying and exhilarating. We were standing on my porch, and in the quiet space between words, the air grew thick with unspoken possibility. I realized I was falling for her, deeply. The thought scared me. This was my wife's sister. But then another thought surfaced crystal clear. Under the very rules Sarah had created, this was allowed. I wasn't breaking any rules. I was for the first time simply following them. We took it slow, knowing the minefield we were navigating, but the connection was too real to ignore. With Abigail, there were no games, no logistical conversations. There was just honesty. We built our relationship on communication, on checking in, on making sure we were both okay every step of the way. It was the complete opposite of the relationship I now had with my wife. While Sarah and I were drifting apart, Abigail and I were building a bridge plank by plank with trust and genuine affection. The love I developed for Abigail wasn't an act of revenge. It wasn't a spiteful move to get back at Sarah. It was the most unexpected and beautiful thing that had ever happened to me, growing organically in the space that Sarah's new rules had created. Abigail made me feel alive again. She reminded me what it felt like to be loved, not for what you provide, but for who you are. Our relationship blossomed. We became inseparable, and the whole time we were transparent. Sarah knew we were spending time together. At first, I don't think she took it seriously. She was busy with her own new life. She'd make little jokes about it, seemingly unbothered. To her, I think I was just her passive husband, and Abigail was her little sister. She couldn't seem to compute that we could be forming something real. But it was. More real than anything I'd felt in years. So 1 week ago, I asked Abigail to marry me. We were on a weekend trip, and I just knew. I knew that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with this incredible woman. It wasn't about replacing Sarah, it was about choosing Abigail. When I slipped the ring on her finger and she said yes through happy tears, it felt like the first day of the rest of my life. We knew we would have to tell Sarah. We knew it would be complicated, but we were operating entirely within the bounds of her agreement. I was still legally married to her, yes, but our marriage was now a partnership in name only. My heart, my commitment, my future that now belonged to Abigail. We came back from our trip ready to explain our decision and begin the messy process of figuring out what came next. We were a team. We were in love. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The path ahead was uncertain, but I wasn't walking it alone. I had no idea the real storm was just about to break. That feeling of peace lasted for exactly 2 days, 2 blissful, perfect days. Abigail and I came home from our trip feeling like we were floating on air. The engagement ring on her finger felt like an anchor in a swirling sea, a solid, tangible promise of a future. We spent the day unpacking not just our clothes, but our plans. We talked about where we might live, what kind of wedding she wanted, the silly, wonderful details that make a life together feel real. The house was quiet and calm, filled with the warmth of our shared hope. We knew the conversation with Sarah was coming. We planned to sit down with her that evening to be calm, respectful, and firm. We were a team ready to face the fallout together. But Sarah didn't wait for our invitation. She showed up on our doorstep late that afternoon. I saw her car pull into the driveway and my stomach immediately clenched into a tight, cold knot. Abigail was in the kitchen making tea, humming softly to herself. I met Sarah at the door trying to arrange my face into something neutral. She didn't look sad. She didn't look angry. She looked businesslike. Her expression was set, her posture rigid, as if she were walking into a corporate negotiation she was determined to win. She brushed past me without a word of greeting and walked straight into the living room, her purse clutched in her hand like a briefcase. "We need to talk," she said, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion. Abigail came out of the kitchen, a mug in each hand, her smile faltering when she saw Sarah's thunderous expression. She placed the mugs on the coffee table, her eyes darting from her sister to me. The warm, peaceful atmosphere of the house evaporated in an instant, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. "Okay," I said, sitting down on the couch opposite her. Abigail sat beside me, her hand instinctively finding mine. I felt her fingers lace through mine, a small, reassuring pressure. We were a united front. Sarah's eyes flickered down to our joined hands, and a flicker of something annoyance, maybe disgust, crossed her face before she masked it again. She took a deep breath, like a CEO about to deliver a quarterly report. "It's over," she announced, looking directly at me. "My thing with my boss, it's done. He ended it." I just stared at her. I'd expected this day would come eventually. Relationships born from workplace affairs rarely have a happy ending. But the way she said it was so clinical, so detached. There was no hint of heartbreak in her voice. It was a simple status update. "I'm sorry to hear that, Sarah," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want her to be in pain. She waved a dismissive hand as if my sympathy was an irrelevant distraction. "Don't be. It is what it is. It ran its course." She leaned forward, placing her hands on her knees, her gaze intense and unwavering. But that's not the important part. The important part is what happens now. I waited. The air in the room was so thick I could barely breathe. Abigail's grip on my hand tightened. "The experiment is over," Lucas Sarah declared. Her voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "The open marriage agreement is terminated. As of right now, we're going back to the way things were." I felt a jolt like a surge of ice water through my veins. The sheer audacity of the statement left me speechless. The experiment is over. As if the last 12 months of our lives, the pain, the loneliness, the new love I had found, were all just some science project she had been conducting. And now, because her side of the experiment had failed, she was simply shutting down the whole lab. She saw the shock on my face and clearly misinterpreted it. A small, almost triumphant smile touched her lips. She thought I was relieved. She thought I was the loyal husband patiently waiting for his queen to return to her throne. "I know it's been hard," she continued, her tone softening into something condescendingly gentle, "but I'm back now. We can put all this behind us. We can go back to being a real husband and wife. Just us." I finally found my voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. "Sarah, it's not that simple." Her smile vanished. "What do you mean it's not that simple? It's perfectly simple. I'm your wife. I'm ending the agreement that I started. We're closing the marriage. End of story." She said it with such absolute, unshakable certainty, like she held a remote control to our lives and had just pressed the reset button, expecting everything to instantly revert to its factory settings from 5 years ago. She was completely ignoring the reality of the situation. She was ignoring the woman sitting right next to me. Her eyes then shifted to Abigail. It was the first time she'd truly acknowledged her sister's presence since walking in. Her expression changed, hardening into something cold and dismissive, and that she said, nodding towards Abigail as if she were a piece of furniture to be removed, "needs to end. Immediately." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I could feel Abigail flinch beside me, a sharp intake of breath. Sarah wasn't just talking to me anymore. She was delivering a verdict, a sentence upon her own sister, right to her face. "You two have had your fun," Sarah went on, her voice dripping with disdain. "It was a cute little distraction for you, Lucas, while I was busy. And Abigail, I'm sure it was interesting for you to play house with your sister's husband. But the game is over. So you need to say your goodbyes. I want her out of this house by tonight." I stared at her, my mind reeling, trying to process the colossal, breathtaking arrogance of what she was demanding. A game, a distraction. She was talking about the deepest, most genuine connection I had felt in years, as if it were a temporary hobby. She was talking about the woman I loved, the woman I had asked to be my wife, as if she were a house guest who had overstayed her welcome. My shock began to curdle into a slow, burning rage. The silence stretched on, thick with unspoken fury. I could feel the tremor in Abigail's hand, and I squeezed it tighter, trying to pour all of my strength, all of my certainty, into that simple touch. Sarah seemed to take our stunned silence as acquiescence. She actually leaned back, a look of satisfaction on her face, as if she had just successfully closed a difficult deal. "Good," she said briskly. "I'm glad we're all on the same page. It'll be awkward for a little while, I'm sure, but we're family. We'll get over it. You and I, Lucas, can start fresh. That's when I finally snapped. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it cut through the tension in the room like a razor. Sarah's eyes widened. She looked genuinely surprised, as if the possibility of my refusal had never once entered her mind. What did you say? I said no. I repeated, my voice growing stronger, fueled by a year of pent-up frustration and a fierce, protective love for the woman beside me. You don't get to do this, Sarah. You don't get to just walk in here and dictate the terms of my life. Your life, she scoffed, her voice rising. This is our life, Lucas. Our marriage. A marriage you seem to have forgotten all about. No, you're the one who seems to have forgotten I shot back standing up. I couldn't sit still any longer. You're the one who came to me 12 months ago and blew a hole in the side of our marriage because you wanted to date your boss. You set the new rules, Sarah, not me. You opened the door. You can't stand there and act shocked that I eventually walked through it. That was different, she insisted, her face turning red. That was a temporary situation. And what did you think this was? I asked, gesturing between myself and Abigail. A temporary situation for me. Did you think I was just supposed to sit here alone in this house for a year, waiting patiently for your affair to run its course? Did you think my feelings, my loneliness, my life just went on pause? Because you decided you wanted to play the field. My heart was hammering in my chest. This wasn't just an argument, it was a dam breaking. All the nights I'd spent alone, all the canceled plans, all the logistical, emotionless conversations we'd had, it all came rushing out. I did nothing wrong, I said, my voice shaking with the force of my conviction. I followed the rules. Your rules. I found someone who loves me, who respects me, who I have built a real, honest life with over the past 10 months. And you do not get to come in here and burn it to the ground just because your side project fell apart. Sarah stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. For the first time, she looked uncertain. The negotiation wasn't going according to her plan. Then her eyes narrowed and she turned her fury on the one other person in the room. And you, she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Abigail. My own sister. How could you sneaking around with my husband behind my back? Before I could even respond, Abigail spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but it was as steady as a rock. There was no sneaking, Sarah, she said, looking her sister directly in the eye. You knew we were spending time together. You never had a problem with it before. You made jokes about it. Nothing was hidden from you. Because I never imagined you would actually betray me like this, Sarah shrieked. I thought you were my sister. I thought you were just keeping him company. I never ever thought you would try to steal my husband. The accusation was so fundamentally wrong, so twisted that it was almost laughable. This wasn't a story of theft. It was a story of abandonment. Sarah hadn't been robbed. She had walked away from our marriage, leaving the door wide open, and was now furious that the house wasn't empty when she decided to come back. I looked at Sarah, at her face contorted with a sense of righteous fury, and I saw everything with a sudden painful clarity. This wasn't about saving our marriage. It wasn't about love. It was about control. She had lost control of her affair, and now she was scrambling to regain control of me. And as I looked at Abigail, who sat there, weathering her sister's storm with quiet dignity, her hand still locked in mine, I knew there wasn't a choice to be made. The choice had been made months ago, in quiet conversations, in shared laughter, in the slow, steady building of a love based on honesty, not on games. Sarah's accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Stealing her husband. The words were a masterpiece of manipulation designed to paint her as the victim and me as the villain, with Abigail cast as the foolish, home-wrecking sister. But it was a lie, and we all knew it. Nobody stole me, Sarah, I said, my voice dangerously low. You gave me away. You put our marriage on a shelf 12 months ago and walked out the door. The only difference is you expected me to stay on that shelf collecting dust, waiting for you. I'm a person, not a possession. She ignored me completely, her eyes still locked on her sister. This was her new strategy, drive a wedge between me and Abigail. Isolate her. Make her doubt everything. He's using you, can't you see that? Sarah pleaded, her tone shifting from rage to a twisted, feigned concern. "This is all about me. He's angry that I wanted to find myself, that I needed something more, so he went after the one person he knew would hurt me the most. You're not his fiancée, Abigail. You're just his revenge." I watched Abigail's face, searching for any sign of doubt, any flicker of uncertainty, but there was none. She just looked sad. Sad for her sister. Sad for the ugly, desperate person Sarah was revealing herself to be. "Is that what you really think?" Sarah Abigail asked softly. "That my feelings aren't real? That the last 10 months of my life, of our lives, have just been part of some elaborate plan to get back at you?" "Of course it is," Sarah cried. "He never loved you. He's just trying to punish me for leaving him." "Leaving him?" I finally snapped. "You didn't leave. You wanted to have your cake and eat it too. You wanted the security of our marriage and the thrill of your affair. You wanted me to be your safety net while you went swinging on the trapeze. The only problem is, when you fell, you discovered I wasn't waiting underneath you anymore. I'd left the circus." The metaphor hit home. I could see it in her eyes. The shock of being so perfectly, so completely understood. Her whole plan had been predicated on the idea that I would be passive, that I would just wait. The idea that I would build a new life, a better life without her, had simply never entered her mind. And that's when she delivered her ultimatum. Her face hardened, the fake tears vanished, and she became cold, calculating. "Fine," she said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You want to play it this way? Here are the new rules. You have 24 hours. You will call Abigail in front of me and you will end this ridiculous engagement. You will post a public statement on social media about our renewed commitment to our marriage. You will cut all contact with my sister. You do that and we can move past this. We can fix what you've broken." I stared at her, speechless at the sheer audacity. "And if I don't?" A cruel smile played on her lips. "If you don't, I will file for divorce by noon tomorrow. And I will make sure every single person we know, every family member, every friend knows the story. They'll know that my loving, devoted husband had an affair with my own sister while I was fighting to save our marriage. I will burn your reputation to the ground, Lucas. You will be the man who destroyed a family. And she," Sarah said, flicking her eyes toward Abigail, "will be the woman who helped him do it. Your choice." With that, she turned and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind her. The silence she left behind was heavier than any of her shouts had been. I sank back onto the couch, my head in my hands. The threat was real. She could do it. She could twist the narrative, omit the part about the open marriage she initiated, and paint us as the villains. In the court of public opinion, the truth rarely matters as much as the story that gets told first. I felt Abigail's hand on my back, a small, warm circle of comfort in the cold dread that was creeping into the room. "She's wrong, you know," Abigail said quietly. "What we have isn't revenge. It's real." I know, I whispered. "But she's right about one thing. She can make our lives a living nightmare." "Only if we let her," Abigail said, her voice firm. She moved to sit in front of me, taking both of my hands in hers. "Lucas, look at me. We knew this was a possibility. We knew she wouldn't just let you go, but her games don't get to define us. Her lies don't get to be our truth." We talked for hours that night, weighing the options and the consequences, but really, there was no choice to be made. Capitulating to Sarah's demands would mean destroying the most real and honest relationship I had ever known. It would mean validating her manipulation and accepting a life sentence in a prison of her making. We decided to call her bluff. The next morning, we asked her to meet us one last time, not to surrender, but to give her one final chance to walk away with a shred of dignity. She arrived looking smug, confident that her ultimatum had worked. She sat across from us in the living room, a queen holding court, ready to receive our surrender. So she began, a triumphant glint in her eye. "Have you come to your senses?" "We've come to a decision, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. Abigail's hand was in mine, a silent source of strength. "And the answer is no. I will not be ending my engagement to Abigail. I will not be participating in your public charade, and I will not be returning to a marriage with you." Sarah's face fell. This was not the script she had written. You're choosing her after everything, after my ultimatum. Especially after your ultimatum, I said, because it showed me who you really are. This isn't about love, Sarah. It's about control, and I'm done being controlled. She started to launch into her practice speech, the one she'd probably rehearsed all night. The one about betrayal, about the sanctity of our original marriage from 5 years ago, about how I'd twisted her request for space into a weapon against her. She was painting herself as the tragic heroine, the wronged wife. That's when Abigail spoke. "Stop, Sarah," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room, silencing her sister instantly. "Just stop lying." Sarah looked stunned. "Lying? I'm not lying." "Yes, you are," Abigail continued, her gaze unwavering. "You're lying about all of it, about why you wanted the open marriage in the first place." I looked at Abigail, confused. What was she talking about? Abigail turned to me, her eyes full of a sad resolve. "Lucas, I'm sorry I didn't tell you this sooner. I hoped it would never come to this. I hoped she would just let it go." She took a deep breath and turned back to her sister. "Do you remember that night about 8 months ago? We had dinner, just the two of us. You were a few months into your thing with your boss, and you were complaining." Sarah's face had gone pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," Abigail said calmly. "You were complaining that Lucas wasn't reacting the way you wanted him to. You told me the whole affair with your boss was just a pretext. You said, and I quote, 'I just wanted to see if he would fight for me.' You said you wanted to give him a little shock, to see if he'd get jealous if he'd put his foot down and demand you stay. You told me you never thought he'd actually be okay with it. You never ever imagined he would take you at your word and build a life of his own." The room went completely still. Every word Abigail spoke landed like a physical blow, a test, the whole thing. The past 12 months of my life, the heartache, the loneliness, the eventual beautiful discovery of a new love had all been the result of a sick, manipulative loyalty test. Sarah was just staring at her sister, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. She had been exposed, utterly and completely. I felt a cold wave wash over me. It was the kind of clarity that hurts. The marriage hadn't been broken when she asked for an open relationship. It had been broken long before that. It was broken by the fact that she saw our love not as a partnership, but as a game. I wasn't her husband. I was a piece on her chessboard, and she had just been spectacularly checkmated. "Is that true, Sarah?" I asked, my voice devoid of all emotion. She couldn't meet my eyes. She just stared at the floor, her entire victim narrative shattered around her feet. Her silence was all the answer I needed. I stood up. I felt strangely calm. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound sense of finality. I looked down at the woman I had once loved, the woman I had married 5 years ago, and I felt nothing but a distant pity. "Your test failed, Sarah," I said quietly. "You wanted to see if I would fight for you. But you can't fight for something that's built on lies. You can't fight for someone who sees your love as a game to be won or lost. My loyalty isn't to the woman who tested me. It's to the woman who was honest with me." I walked over to the door and held it open. "I think you should go." Sarah finally looked up, her eyes swimming with real tears this time. Tears of defeat. She stood defeated and walked out without another word. I closed the door behind her, and it felt like closing the final page of a very long, very sad book. I turned back to Abigail, who was standing right where I had left her. I walked over and pulled her into my arms, burying my face in her hair. "Thank you," I whispered, for what she asked, her voice muffled against my chest. "For telling the truth, for being you." In the end, Sarah did file for divorce just as she threatened, but her story had no power anymore. The truth had a way of getting out, and without her victim status, she was just a bitter woman who had gambled with her marriage and lost. The victory wasn't in winning against Sarah. The victory was the quiet morning a week later, sitting on the porch with Abigail coffee in our hands, planning our future. A future that wasn't a test or a game. A future built not on the ruins of a broken marriage, but on the solid foundation of honesty, respect, and a love that had been tested by fire and had come out stronger. We had survived the fallout, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, completely free.